In this video, we're going to change out the front brake rotors and brake pads on a 2008 Honda Civic. Now, as always, all my brake videos will apply to pretty much most cars, general techniques. It's all relatively the same with a certain little twists here and there. So this is for the Honda Civic. Obviously, we need to jack up the car and get the front wheels off the ground to do this job. And I have a whole nother video about jacking up your car safely that goes in great deal about jacking up your car. So you want to check that out. If you are not using an impact wrench and you're instead using a 4-way or the wrench included with your car to remove the lug nuts, you want to break the lug nuts loose while the car is still on the ground. But with an impact, it doesn't matter. The car is already jacked up and safely supported, and you can see I zoomed those lug nuts right off. If you already have the car up in the air and you need to remove them with a regular 4-way or whatever, you can have someone hold the brake pedal. As always, when you're going to be doing a brake job, you want to get a can of brake cleaner and spray the whole thing down just to remove most of the brake dust. That stuff's pretty toxic. These are 12 millimeter. Alright, these ones are a little tight. There you go, that's what you do. Beat on it a little bit. First thing to do is what I was just doing there, is remove the 2 caliper bolts. These are 12 millimeter. There it is. Put a little bit of elbow grease in it. Now the caliper should come right off. Maybe you got to give it a little bit of a wiggle. And a lot of people talk about tying this up with a piece of wire or a bungee or something. On this car in particular, there's the strut, and it actually kind of fits nice and conveniently right in that strut right there. Here's a close-up shot just to show you. Now you need to remove the 2 bracket bolts that hold the caliper bracket on. On this car, these are 17 millimeter. So oddly enough, on the Civic, there is room to get an impact to get these bracket bolts off. And I even realized I could just turn the wheel to get to the bottom one with the impact. Woo! Now that makes the job so much easier. Otherwise, you're going to have to use a breaker bar. Okay, so maybe you do want to tie your caliper up. My mistake. Learned from me. Okay, so Honda likes to put these little Phillips screws in here. Now this one doesn't have them. Someone must have already changed these rotors once. But if your car has them, you're going to have to remove 2 Phillips screws from there that hold the rotor in place. They're not necessary, but they are in there. And sometimes they can be a pain to get off. You're going to need a number 3 Phillips bit. I know that for sure. Probably a socket adapter too would be the best bet. Now, oddly enough, this rotor is kind of stuck on this hub, and the passenger side wasn't like this. It came right off, but this one was really just kind of a little bit of rust build up. It would not come straight off that hub. It's almost like the center hub was bigger diameter than the cutout in the rotor. So if you encounter this, you're going to have to do like I did here, and I started pounding on one side, and I had to rotate it, which actually spins the opposite wheel on the other side of the car. So it'll need to be off the ground. Rotate it so I can pound on the opposite side of the rotor. Now I couldn't pound just on the opposite side because it's got that splash guard behind it, and no real easy way to get that off without getting the rotor off. So gotta spin it around, keep banging on it, and eventually I got it off. Installing the new rotor is as easy as just sliding it right on the hub. Granted, you can align the holes right. It's a good idea to put a lug nut on to hold the rotor in place if you don't have those Phillips screws, which I wouldn't even recommend putting back in anyways. So I feel like kind of an orangutan here, but these brake pads would not come out of that bracket. And you can see, man, I'm beating on it. Those things are in there. Well, I don't know what the deal was, but I had to beat the friggin' brake pads out of that bracket. You might have to too. So you can hate on me all you want, and they weren't coming out any other way. Now we can reattach the caliper bracket to the steering knuckle here, and I personally like to tighten these bolts down by hand, as the impact wrench can over torque stuff very easily. Now is a good time to take a second to check the slide pins here, make sure it's sliding nice and good. Now on this Honda, these are sealed and don't come out. It's not greasable, so as long as they're sliding freely, leave them be. Okay, now we can stick the brake pads in the bracket here, and it's the ones with the squealer, the little metal piece protruding, always usually goes on the inside since there's more room. And sometimes they can be a little finicky to get in. You gotta push a little tab down, make sure it's all nice and flat, and there they go right on. Now it's time for what some may call the most challenging part of a brake job. Is you gotta push that caliper piston back in. I'm using a 3-inch C-clamp and an old brake pad that I just took out, and trying to get it nice and centered, and I'll push that piston right back in. Now all that's left to do is put the caliper back on. Get those bolts nice and snug. You know, note about torquing bolts by hand. Definitely get them pretty tight. Don't sit there and wail on it. You know, put all your weight onto these. The bracket bolts, however, that we did earlier, you can torque those pretty good. Definitely get those nice and tight. And then all I got left to do is stick the tire back on. I straightened the wheel out there, you saw, and always start your lug nuts by hand. You know, even if you're using an impact or whatever, 4-way, whatever, always start them by hand. You don't want to cross thread them. So down on there, zoomed them on with the impact, and I think we're good to go.